Turns 40. We asked two longtime residents what life was like way back when. Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Qiuyuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. Now, Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi kicked off week-long tour to Europe on Tuesday. It is the first overseas trip for China's top diplomat since the COVID-19 outbreak. And at his first stop in Italy, Foreign Minister Wang said that China will continue to help Europe to fight the pandemic and revive its economy. And his visit has been read as Beijing's attempt to ensure Europe's neutrality in tensions with the United States and to mend fences after the outbreak, which some still blame on China. So, are either readings correct? What does the foreign minister hope to achieve with this visit? And how will Europe respond? I'm now joined from Rome by Michele Geraci, former Undersecretary of State at the Italian Ministry of Economic Development, and from Beijing by Mr. Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department of European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. Great to have you both with us. So this is Foreign Minister Wang Yi's first overseas trip since the COVID-19 outbreak. Let me first start with Mr. Geraci here. What do you make of the timing and the choice of destination, which is, of course, Italy?
I think it shows the importance that those five European countries have in the eyes of Chinese policymakers. As you know better than I, also the order of country is important, is a very interesting signal. Italy, as you know, is the only of those five countries that have signed the MOU on the Belt and Road. And of course, this is something that I'm very proud to have carried out while in the government. And so choosing Italy as the first destination is a sign that China really wants to do business with Italy. And Italy does want to do business with China, like I think any other country in the world. But putting Italy first is yet another indication that the relationship, the commercial relationship, has entered, we hope, a new positive momentum following not just the MOU, but also Italy being the guest of honor at the Shanghai Fair last year, and forthcoming expo events in the next couple of months in Shanghai. So we hope that this good relationship between the two countries trickles down also at corporate level via increased volumes of trade, despite, of course, the difficulty of the virus.
Mr. Cui, let me bring you into this. So this trip starts at Italy, but now it will take the foreign minister also to the Netherlands, Norway, France, and Germany. Why these countries in particular?
I think Minister Wang has some major considerations when he decided his trip in Europe. Besides Italy, as the Geraci mentioned, a lot of the reasons. I think for the Netherlands, for Norway, and for France and Germany, I think certainly those countries they do have a very good cooperation even before the pandemic. And I think that's a very important reason to choose them as destinations. I think the second consideration is during the pandemic, and China and those European countries, they do have very good cooperation to fight against the coronavirus. And the third is how could China and the European countries to open some new areas for cooperation. I think for Norway and for some other France, Germany, we do have a lot of cooperation, especially some contracts, also some cooperation. And also, yes, I think maybe the final reason for these destinations could be that there should be some representativeness for the different or various regions. We can find out the trip. Mr. Wang will have a first stop at South Europe, and then to the North Europe and the Western Europe. So I think there are also some member states of the European Union and also non-member states of the European Union. So it shows China now has a very comprehensive understanding of Europe, and also how China could have a more comprehensive, policy towards the whole Europe.
So let's get down to it. Let's take a closer look at the cooperation projects. Now, some media reports say that one of Foreign Minister Wang Yi's goal is to deepen cooperation on fighting the virus and also to keep global industrial and supply chains stable. Mr. Geraci, how important is China-Europe cooperation in both regards as they work to restore their economies?
Well, you mentioned the supply chain. This is something that more and more people are focusing their attention. And of course, it is important to understand the real impact of this integration. I'll give you some figures. Italy exports to China officially are only 13 billion euros. But if we take into account all the goods that Italy sells to third country and then they go directed into China, and the components that Italy supplies, for example, to Germany, France, the UK, that then gets reassembled in France, Germany, and resold back into China, the total amount of Italian exports that end up in China is double that amount. And so that gives you an idea that the global value chain is a hidden number that is about 100% of the official values. So this is very important. And if I may add also, you asked before why these 5 countries. My interpretation is, of course, France and Germany are also big trade partners, so it is a must visit, meeting with Macron and with Angela Merkel. Holland is another important entry point for the Belt and Road. Let's not forget that Costco has about 10% of the overall container capacity in the port of Rotterdam in Holland. So it is important to have an interest in the Mediterranean side for the shipping that go via the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean and hence Italy, but also, and more important, the northern part of Europe, Rotterdam, especially as the Arctic route may open up and lead more traffic going to the northern parts of European ports. Norway, it's an interesting case because, of course, there is oil, and it also shows symbolically that the relationship between the two countries seems to go back into the positive path after the issues of many years ago. And so I think it's a mix. Mediterranean countries, MOU, Italy, core European countries, biggest economy, Germany and France, Holland as a port, and Norway, both for resources, and to really tell the world that China plays a nice role in the international arena and puts aside the dispute for the past and reestablishes a good relationship even with Norway. So a very, very interesting visit by Minister Wang Yi.
It's a careful selection of countries, indeed. Mr. Tsui, now China is also pushing for the joint China-EU investment agreement. I mean, what is the prospect of this agreement or further China-Europe cooperation happening as part of Europe are still fighting the pandemic?
I think that's also the very big importance of this visit by Mr. Wang, because so far we could find out a very different situation in China and in some European countries. Now, even for the pandemic, I think now it's good time for both two sides to have some more coordination to fight against the pandemic. As we know, because of a very, very close cooperation and also very close industry and supply chain, so that once it will not be a good situation in European countries, so it will always give some continued, negative impact on this, normal, connection between China and the European countries. Also, I think this time, Mr. Wang should have some, discussion with his counterpart in European side to make some joint efforts to find out maybe a roadmap to reopen or restart the normal, exchange and connection for the trade, investment, and even personal movement. So I think that's very, very critical, and for China and Europe to go back to the normal track. Even, yes, as we know, there will be a long time for this fight against the coronavirus, but still we need to have some very good time to go back to the normal track.
And I also got to mention the factor of the United States here, the elephant in the room here. There are media reports saying that China's foreign minister is heading to Europe amid souring U.S. ties as a kind of damage control exercise. Mr. Geraci, what's your take on this? I mean, after COVID-19, which some still blame on China, and the tensions over Huawei, 5G, there are fears of the formation of a united transatlantic front against China. Do you think that is true?
This is the fear. I always take a positive and hopefully correct view. I think the electoral campaign in the United States, as often, I follow them for 30 years, it does have an impact. And most European leaders, I tell you, because that's also what we do in Europe, and that's what even we in Italy do, we try to find an enemy. Better if this enemy is someone abroad. It could be country X, country Y, and that brings it creates a monster so that the leaders can be the hero to defeat the monster. This is the narrative that gets accelerated as we approach elections. We had this in many other situations. And so I think there is a little bit of electoral narrative in this dispute between the United States and China, and I do believe that after November it will enter a new normal. Now, this new normal is not going to be like before because there are also some objective disputes. The key one that we need to recognize is that when country A loses its economic dominance and country B rises, there is always a conflict. In 1870s, when the United States overcome the United Kingdom, that's also what happened. Now we are in a situation where these changes happen much faster. And therefore, the incumbent countries do find a little bit difficult to manage the fast rise, in this case of China. I have to say, in a way, it is the success and the speed of Chinese success in the last 20, 30 years, let's say since 2001, since the entry into the WTO, that has brought China to the center of the world trade. And maybe we in the West, I tell this to my former colleagues in the government, maybe we were kind of asleep, maybe we were underestimating the strength of the Chinese system in bringing the economy and doubling every 7 years the income and the GDP, something unheard in the history of economy in mankind. Now, of course, it's a little bit, in a way, too late because China has reached a reasonable status in the world trade, but and another fact little known to the world, very smartly China has diminished its importance from trade. Back in 2000, Chinese was exporting about 1/3 of its GDP, so very highly reliant on international trade. Now this figure has gone down to about 18%, so of the total Chinese economy, only 18% comes from trade, while, for example, my country, Italy, still has a very high level, 30%. So China knew, of course, that it was going to develop very fast. They probably knew that this would have caused some frictions. They knew that the friction would have caused some kind of a potential decoupling. And so China has anticipated this, and in the last 10 years has diminished its reliance on trade. Now, the new challenge for China is to get rid of one external variable, which is always hard to manage. And I know because I used to be responsible for Italian trade. It's very hard to manage these external variables. And now China needs to do the famous rebalancing, which is less investment and more domestic demand. My understanding of China is that even in the worst case scenario, where there is let's say not 100%, but a strong decoupling in technology, chips, and other sectors, even mobile app, WeChat, and so on, I think China will take a hit in the short term, but China also has the capability to develop its own indigenous industry. So come 1 year, 2 years, as it has happened in the past, I think this slap that China may take, the hit that China may take in the short term, could turn into even stronger long-term advantage, so that China relies even less and less from export and even less and less from foreign technology. So I think the West also needs to be careful to be pragmatic, because at the end of the day, you know, it is our company also that suffers. It's the Italian company that would suffer from a decoupling. It is the consumer that suffer from a diminishing number of suppliers. If the number of suppliers I take the 5G, you mentioned 5G. If instead of having 4 suppliers, we have 3, of course, there is the possibility that the cartel or semi-monopoly would increase prices, and we don't need these at the time where our economy will do minus 15, 1.5. We don't need to create problems. We need to solve problems.
Right. And what's also interesting is that some has compared this trip with the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's trip recently. So he also recently visited a number of European countries, including Austria, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Poland, and Slovenia, as well as the UK, as part of Washington's effort to persuade Europe to take a tougher line against Beijing. Now, Mr. Cui, Foreign Minister Wang Yi has said that his visit, we have that statement, let me put that off for you guys. His visit is aimed at world peace and closer cooperation with Europe to fight unilateralism and a Cold War mindset. I mean, what do you make of the different selection of countries by Chinese and U.S. diplomats? Are they competing for opportunities, or does it reflect divisions in Europe over China?
Yes, I think that recently we can find out, especially from American side, is try to do some works with some European countries and to collect some even alliance to fight against with China. But I think that so far for this visit by Minister Wang, I think objectively it gives more opportunity for European countries to understand what the real interests of European countries. Because as we are understanding that American officials come to Europe always to teach European countries what you should not to do with China. But how about the Chinese attitude and how about the Chinese perspective? China always try to provide some advice to European countries, saying that, okay, what we can do together, what we can do together to promote our cooperation and to create the common interests. I think once we get some comparison between China and the United States, between the behaviors, between the China and the United States, senior officials, we can find a difference. Of course, I think the right of a decision belongs to the European countries, including Italy or some other countries. They can make some own decision to find out what's a real partner, what's a real threat. So I think now it's time for European countries to find out more truth and to have some wiser, judgment.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you very much to my guest, Mr. Michele Geraci, former Undersecretary of State at the Italian Ministry of Economic Development, and also from Beijing by Mr. Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department of European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. We'll now take a short break.